I have always been a quiet man. Not the broken kind of quiet, not the man who goes silent because he's been beaten down or hollowed out. The deliberate kind. The kind who chooses his words like he chooses his tools. One at a time, the right one for the job, nothing wasted. 6 years of marriage to Vanessa gave me a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like the one I'd wanted. A clean house, a steady rhythm, the particular comfort of knowing where everything belongs and finding it there when you reach for it. I worked long hours as a civil engineer. She didn't work, and I never once resented that. I loved providing. That was simply part of how I understood myself. The man who builds things, who maintains them, who shows up every day whether or not anyone notices. We were fine, that's what I told myself. Not electric, maybe. Not the way the first 2 years had been, but fine, stable, solid. I was wrong about what solid meant. It was a Tuesday evening in November when my life rearranged itself, and it did so through the most mundane possible channel. I picked up the household iPad from the kitchen counter because I wanted to check the weather before my morning commute. That was the entirety of my intention. The weather. Whether to wear the heavier jacket. The screen lit up with a notification, an audio file, auto-synced from Vanessa's iPhone to the shared iCloud drive we'd set up years ago and mostly forgotten about. She had always been careless with technology. Left things open, left things sinking, left digital trails the way some people leave cabinet doors ajar. I had always been patient enough to leave her things alone. Almost always. The file was labeled with a date stamp from that afternoon. 10 minutes and 42 seconds long. I don't know exactly why I pressed play. Some instinct. Some quiet alarm that had been ringing just below the threshold of my attention for months that I'd been too disciplined or too afraid to acknowledge. I plugged in my earbuds, sat down at the kitchen table, pressed play. For the first 90 seconds, laughter. Vanessa's laughter, the warm, genuine, unguarded kind that I had not heard aimed in my direction in over a year. Then a man's voice. Low and confident, younger than my 41 years by at least a decade. The easy voice of someone who has never had to work very hard for anything. "I love you, you know that, right?" "I know," she said, my wife, in our home on a Tuesday afternoon. "I love you too, we just have to be patient a little longer." I set the iPad down. I picked it up again. What followed was not a love confession, that I might have survived. What followed was a business plan. I listened completely still, my coffee going cold beside me as my wife calmly and methodically outlined how she intended to destroy me. She would manufacture evidence of domestic abuse. She would stage bruises. She would call the police. I would be arrested, my reputation dismantled, my word worth nothing against hers once a restraining order was in place and a criminal charge was pending. The divorce proceedings that would follow would tilt entirely and catastrophically in her favor. My savings. My property, my retirement account. A decade of early mornings and late nights quietly assembled, brick by brick, all of it redirected to her. To them. "And then it's just us," she said, her voice warm with the future she'd planned. "Just us," he agreed. The recording ended. I sat in the silence of my own kitchen for a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The ordinary world continued its ordinary business, indifferent to the fact that the floor had just dropped out of my life. I did not cry. I did not rage. Those responses would have required me to feel something other than the cold, clarifying thing that was moving through me in that moment. Something that was not grief and not anger, but was perhaps what lies on the far side of both of them. A kind of terrible clarity. I opened my phone, connected it to the iPad, saved a copy of the audio file with its original timestamp intact. Then I went upstairs, undressed quietly in the dark, and lay down beside my wife who had spent her afternoon planning to have me arrested and stripped of everything, and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside the window turned from black to gray. I didn't sleep, I planned. I called in sick the next day for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor sounded surprised. I told him it was nothing serious. That was the first lie I had told in recent memory, and it sat cleanly in my mouth. I was already learning. The private investigator's office was the kind of place that doesn't announce itself, a second-floor suite above a dry cleaner in Midtown, accessible by a staircase that smelled of steam and cleaning solvent. Noah Hill met me at the door, former detective, compact and unhurried with the particular economy of movement that belongs to men who have. He spent years watching other people without being noticed. His eyes were the kind that make you feel already known, already cataloged. I didn't waste his time. I gave him Vanessa's description, her car, her routines, the yoga class on Tuesdays that had stretched over the past 6 months from 1 hour to 3. The Thursday lunches that never produced shopping bags. The particular brightness she carried home on certain evenings that had nothing to do with me. I gave him the first name from the recording. Noah absorbed it all without expression. "I know a manager at the Grandview Hotel," he said. "You think that's where they've been meeting?" "That would be my best guess." He nodded once. "Give me a few days." From there, I walked 6 blocks to the office of Raymond Osei. If Noah Hill was the kind of man who watched, Raymond was the kind who dismantled. His reputation in family law was specific and widely respected. He was quiet in courtrooms in the way that very powerful things are sometimes quiet, and opposing counsel had learned to be afraid of his patience. His office was orderly in a way that communicated absolute control. He listened to my entire account without a single interruption. The recording, the plan, the affair, the timeline. When I finished, he sat with it for a moment, his hands folded on the desk. "The audio is compelling," he said finally, "but we need to make it bulletproof." He shifted forward in his chair. "Infidelity documentation from your PI eliminates her claim to punitive assets in most jurisdictions. That's significant. But more importantly," he looked at me directly, "if she plans to stage an abuse incident, you need to be able to prove it was staged. That means cameras, every common area of the house. Kitchen, living room, hallways. Legal in your state as long as it's your own property. And you have no expectation of recording privileged conversations." "I can install them tonight," I said. "And Charles," he held my gaze, "when it happens and based on what you've described it will happen, you don't raise your voice, you don't touch her, you don't react. You let her do what she's planned to do, you let the cameras do the work." I nodded. "You're already winning," Raymond said. "The only thing left is to avoid losing." I drove home. I made dinner. I sat across from my wife and passed her the salt when she reached for it, and she thanked me with the easy smile of someone who believes they hold every card in the deck. I smiled back. "What?" Vanessa was out that evening, shopping, she said, with the particular lightness of a woman who is going somewhere else entirely and has grown comfortable lying about it. She kissed my cheek at the door. The kiss meant nothing. It had probably meant nothing for a long time, and I had mistaken nothing for something, the way people do when they've invested too much to look clearly. I waited until her car turned off the street. Then I went to work. 6 cameras, 40 minutes start to finish. One mounted above the kitchen cabinets, angled wide enough to cover the full room. One in the living room, nestled behind a row of books I had owned since graduate school and Vanessa had never once touched. One in the hallway near the front door. Each one smaller than a USB drive, matte black, motion activated, backing up continuously to a cloud account she didn't know existed. I tested every feed from my phone in the parking lot of the hardware store where I'd bought them, confirmed the footage was clean and time-stamped, and drove home. I made dinner. I read until she came back, bags in hand, bright with whatever she'd actually been doing. "Anything good?" I asked about the shopping. She showed me a scarf. I said it was nice. It probably was. 2 days passed. I went to work. I came home. I passed her the salt. I watched television beside her in the evenings and noticed, with the detached attention of someone conducting an experiment, how little of our shared life was actually shared anymore. We were 2 people using the same furniture. On the 3rd day, Noah called. "She's at the Grandview right now," he said. "Room 614. I've got eyes on it." A brief pause, the professional kind. "You're going to have everything you need, Charles, photo and video, complete documentation. Send it to the lawyer when it's done." "Already planned." That night, Vanessa came home glowing in the particular way she sometimes did, a brightness that was specific and private, that curved inward instead of outward, that had nothing to do with me and never had. She talked about traffic. She mentioned a sale at a boutique. I listened and nodded and refilled her wine glass, and twice my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. I excused myself to use the bathroom, locked the door, opened the messages from Noah and looked at the photographs for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I forwarded everything to Raymond without comment. Raymond's response arrived within the hour. Draft papers. Be ready by morning. Wait for her to move first. I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, at the face of a man who had spent 6 years building a life someone else had been quietly planning to demolish. I did not look broken. I looked, if anything, resolved. I returned to the living room, watched television beside my wife until she fell asleep. Then I sat in the dark for a while, alone with the knowledge of what was coming. I let it come. It happened on a Saturday. I was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, the morning light coming through the window in long, pale strips that crossed the floor and climbed the far wall. It was a beautiful morning, the kind that should have felt like something. I was standing at the counter listening to the particular silence of the house, and then I wasn't. From the bedroom above me came the sound of Vanessa moving with unusual energy, drawers opening, footsteps crossing and recrossing, then silence. Then a sound that was rhythmic and quiet, and slightly wrong in a way I could not immediately name, like someone performing a task that requires a certain grim concentration. I sipped my coffee, I waited. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was red and swollen along the left cheek, a dark bruise already rising in a way that takes most people longer to develop and takes some people no time at all if they know the right technique and have something to practice with. Her eyes were wet. Her expression was everything she needed it to be, wounded, terrified, barely holding herself together. Behind her right thigh, partially concealed, was the large wooden serving spoon from the drawer beside the stove. She had always admired how expressive her face could be. She had told me that once, laughing, and I had thought it was charming. "You hit me," she said, her voice fracturing exactly where voices fracture when they are supposed to. "You hit me again, and I can't do this anymore." I set down my mug. She dialed 911. What she did with her voice on that call was genuinely remarkable, fractured, breathless, drowning in convincing grief. She gave them our address. She gave them my name. She said he attacked me with the precision of someone who has said the words in their head so many times that they have become smooth and true-sounding from the repetition. She was magnificent. I say that without irony. She was, in the performance of victimhood, genuinely talented. I sat down at the kitchen table, folded my hands on the surface, and I waited. The officers arrived in 8 minutes. 2 of them, a senior patrolman named Garrett, experienced and careful, and his younger partner who had not yet learned to keep everything off his face. Vanessa met them at the door, tears streaming, one hand pressed to her injured cheek, her whole posture communicating devastation. She pointed at me. The younger officer's expression arranged itself into something ready to protect her. She was extraordinary. They asked me to stand. I stood. They asked me to place my hands behind my back. I did. They cuffed me with professional efficiency, and Garrett explained my rights in the even tone of a man who had done this many times, and he was careful and he was correct, and I held no resentment toward him at all. As they walked me toward the front door, I stopped. "Officer," my voice was completely level. The steadiest it had been all week, actually, because this was the moment, and I had been moving toward it for 4 days, and I was ready for it the way you are ready for a thing when you have planned it down to its last detail. "Before we go, I'd like you to check the cameras." Garrett stopped, frowned. "What cameras?" "The home security cameras. I installed them 3 days ago. They cover the kitchen and the hallway. They're cloud-connected. You can pull up the last 2 hours right now on my phone, which is on the kitchen counter. I'll give you the password." The room changed. Not loudly, it was a quiet change, the kind that happens when a single piece of information rearranges everything around it. I felt it. Garrett felt it. His partner felt it. And Vanessa, for just a moment, for a single unguarded second, showed something behind her eyes that was not grief and not fear, but was the specific look of someone who has stepped onto a stage and discovered the set is different from the one they rehearsed on. Garrett looked at his partner, looked at me, looked at Vanessa. "We can take a look," he said. The footage was 40 seconds long. and it needed nothing added to it. The two officers stood over my phone, which I had unlocked and opened for them, and they watched. They watched Vanessa enter the kitchen from the back hallway. They watched her open the utensil drawer. They watched her remove the wooden serving spoon, the one she'd been half hiding behind her thigh 40 minutes later when she appeared in the doorway claiming I had hit her. They watched her lift it and with a slow and methodical deliberateness that was somehow worse than if it had been frantic, strike herself across the left cheek. Once, twice, 3 times, they watched her pull out her phone and check the result in her front camera, examining the damage with the focused expression of someone assessing their work. A 4th strike, a nod at her own reflection. Then she walked out of frame, toward the living room. And 30 seconds later, from the hallway camera, they could see her composing her face, watch the conscious transition from assessment to anguish, before she came back through the kitchen door where I was standing with my coffee. The younger officer made a small, involuntary sound. Garrett's jaw had gone tight in the way that jaws go when a person is working very hard to keep their expression professional. "There's also an audio recording," I said. "On the same phone, you should hear it before anyone else says anything." Vanessa found her voice. "Those cameras are illegal. He installed them to spy on me. He had no right. You cannot use." "Ma'am," Garrett said it in a tone that was almost gentle and was completely final, and the subject closed. They listened to the recording, all 10 minutes and 42 seconds of it, the laughter, the declaration of love, the unhurried and methodical planning of everything she had intended to do to me. The affair confirmed aloud, the strategy laid out step by step, the staged bruising, the 911 call, the arrest, the restraining order, the financial demolition that would follow. The particular fondness in her voice when she described how thoroughly she intended to take everything I had built. Halfway through, the younger officer stopped the playback and looked at Vanessa. What was in his eyes was not quite disgust. It was a near neighbor of it. She tried several things. She tried denial first. "This is out of context. I don't know what that is. That could be anyone's voice." Then she tried tears, real ones this time, or at least ones that came from a less calculated place than the earlier performance. Then she tried the version of the story where she was the victim of a controlling and abusive husband, where the recording was fabricated or manipulated, where she had been so frightened and so desperate that she had felt she had no choice. Each attempt landed and dissolved against the 40 seconds of footage and 10 minutes of audio that waited on the countertop. Garrett uncuffed me. The sound the ratchet made as it released was one of the more satisfying things I have ever heard in my life. He cuffed Vanessa. Her voice changed register as they moved her toward the door, lost the last of its rehearsed quality, and became something rower and less controlled. I let it happen. I stood beside the kitchen counter and let it happen, and I gave Garrett her lover's last name, found through an evening of careful research, and his apartment address. "He was involved in the planning," I said. "The recording makes that clear. You'll want to speak with him." Garrett paused and looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't fully read. Professional respect, maybe, or something like it. "You handled this very calmly," he said. I turned to the sink. My coffee had gone cold sometime in the last hour. I poured it out, watched it spiral down the drain. "I had good lawyers," I said. "What?" "I went to see her once. I have thought about why, and I don't have a clean answer. Not to gloat, that's not who I am, and it wasn't who I wanted to become through any of this. Perhaps simply to close something, to look at the reality of it rather than the paperwork version, and then to be done." The county jail visiting room was beige under fluorescent light, the particular institutional palette designed, it seems, to suggest that time has stopped, that the world outside does not exist, that this moment of consequence is total and without exit. Vanessa sat across the glass from me in a way I had never seen her sit before, completely unguarded, every layer of performance stripped away by the specific, unglamorous weight of what had happened. She looked younger than I expected. She looked like someone who had placed a very large bet on a very specific outcome, and was now sitting in the aftermath of having been precisely, comprehensively wrong. She picked up the phone, I picked up mine. "Charles, I have the videos from the hotel," I said, not cruelly, simply, the way you state a fact that is going to be relevant. Photographs as well. Noah Hill is an exceptionally thorough investigator. I'd recommend him, though I imagine your schedule is going to be fairly constrained for the foreseeable future." Her mouth opened, closed. Something crossed her face that might have been the beginning of a different version of this conversation, one in which she tried a new approach. Then it passed. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday," I continued. "Raymond Ose is handling it. You may have entered his reputation. He's precise and he's patient, and given the circumstances, the fraud charges, the false police report, everything currently pending, he anticipates the proceedings will be uncomplicated." "Charles," her voice cracked on my name, and this, I noted with the distant attention I had trained myself to maintain, sounded true. Not performed, genuinely cracked. "Please, I made a mistake. I made so many please we could talk about this, we could figure out." I looked at her. I took a full moment and I looked at her honestly, at the face of the woman I had believed in for 6 years, at the person she had turned out to be beneath the life we'd shared, at the distance between those two things. I felt grief, somewhere behind everything else. I want to be honest about that. I am not a man made of stone and I don't want to pretend otherwise. But I also felt the particular piece of a man who has already made his decision and has nothing left to decide. "I hope you find what you were looking for," I said. I set the phone down. I stood up. I walked out through the door and down the corridor and out into the ordinary afternoon light. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. I retained the house, both accounts, and the property upstate, the land my father had left me that Vanessa had always referred to, with a particular curl of her mouth, as that old place. Her counterclaims were dismissed before they were fully entered into the record, which is the inevitable outcome when your opposing legal strategy relies on your credibility, and your credibility has been recorded, time-stamped, and played in front of 2 law enforcement officers before 9 in the morning on a Saturday. Colin, her lover, the 26-year-old who had believed himself to be in love and had perhaps been, in whatever way people his age are in love when the object of their love is also directing their actions, was charged as a co-conspirator. He cooperated with the prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. It was the sensible decision, and from what I understood, the only rational one available to him. Vanessa did not forgive him for it. I thought about that sometimes. The 2 people who had sat together on a Tuesday afternoon and planned my destruction had, by the time the legal process finished with them, given up each other entirely. I sold the house the following spring. I bought a smaller place, closer to a lake I'd driven past 100 times over the years and always meant to spend more time on. My father used to fish. I'd gone with him a few times as a kid and remembered it less as a hobby than as a condition, the particular quality of attention required, the patience that is not waiting but is instead a form of presence. I had time now, real time, the unscheduled kind. There's something I understood, sitting on that dock on an early morning in June with the water going silver in the light, that I hadn't quite been able to articulate before. Patience has a reputation for passivity, for being the thing you do when you have no other options, when you're too afraid or too tired to act. That's not what it is. 10 minutes and 42 seconds of audio changed my life, but it was what came after that determined the shape that change would take. Every choice I made in the 4 days between that recording and that Saturday morning, the investigator, the lawyer, the cameras, the stillness, the refusal to react, was patience applied like a precision tool. Quiet, measured, and exact. She had built a trap, I had built a case. That's the difference between someone who is simply angry and someone who has decided to win. I sat by the water. I let the morning come in around me, and I was, for the first time in a very long time, completely at peace.